This is the Aftermarket Radio Network.
Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Diagnosing the Aftermarket A to Z. I'm Matt Fonslow, and I know, I'm going to use good judgment. I haven't lost my temper in 40 years, but Pilgrim, you caused a lot of trouble this morning. Might have got somebody killed, and somebody ought to belt you in the mouth, but I won't. The hell I won't. That and more after a word from our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training. NAPA Autotech's team of ASE Master Certified Instructors are conducting over 1,200 classes covering 28 automotive topics. To see a selection, go to napaautotech.com for more details. So I get a few questions, of course, in the email and messages, and even just like locally from other shops. And one thing I've noticed is there's still lots of questions concerning programming and what we all need to do programming. And if you look back almost 2 years ago, I recorded an episode with Glenn Forehand, a good friend of mine, local, at least to the state of Minnesota. Kind of did a Q&A on programming. And I don't know that I would say so much has changed. It's episode 83 if it matters. I don't know if stuff's really changed so much, but almost 2 years old, it's probably worth revisiting at least a little bit. It's rough on where to start even, because I don't know that this could really be a thorough how-to for programming. We have to keep stuff so generic because I'm not really focusing on any specific make or car line. But I think the best start is probably, what are you going to use to program? And I don't mean that to be so vague. I don't even mean like interface specifically. The decision has to be made early on, and I think that might be car line specific or more car line specific. And I'll elaborate in a sec. Are you going to do your programming with the factory tool, or are we going to use something more generic like a J2534 interface? Don't get me wrong. Some OE scan tools are essentially using a J2534 interface. Okay. The reason I preface that before being car line specific is certain car lines, we're going to probably lean more towards OE than we would generic. I would pick on a BMW. Not so long ago, I would have probably thrown in Volkswagen Audi. Of course, I think Mercedes, and now I've started with strictly Euro vehicles. But again, not too long ago, I would have definitely put Nissan in that category to try to go OE. And domestic, gotta love with you. OE, or at least the aftermarket solution OE. Chrysler is another one that just seems to struggle with J tooling, J2534. GM and Ford, pretty solid. Of course, a lot of those that work out quite well with J2534 usually are the more affordable interfaces. And then it's really just the subscription that gets you the factory tool. So it's kind of interesting. Maybe the one that at least pops in my head immediately for affordability is BMW. I have not had very good luck going J2534. I'm sure some of you listening are laughing as you're programming a BMW J2534 and have done so successfully time and time again. For me, for the cost of the interface and the subscription, it is just such a no-brainer to go OE. I might also toss in Volkswagen Audi. I just don't find the cost to be that great, especially if you do a fair bit of it. And everybody's going to define fair bit for themselves, what that means. But for us, our shop, GM and Ford dominate the cars we see, car lines, but then it's Volkswagen Audi, and then it's Chrysler Jeep. So for us, OE Volkswagen Audi is just a no-brainer. After that, I think deciding between OE and J-Box, it could be car line dependent. How many of them are you working on? You know what? If GM is dominating your bays, why not have the factory tool? It just seems reasonable. The cost of entry is not that high. Same with Ford. Same with so many of them. And even if the cost of entry is what we might deem expensive, if those cars are in our bays every day and it opens up a market for programming and other endeavors such as like coding and adaptions, especially ones that require online where the aftermarket may be lagging a little bit. That's not always the case, but just something to consider. It's just tool for what you've got, tool up for what you're working on. The other decision I think to consider is either operating multiple laptops or having, one or two that have some hard drive partitioning. And everybody's got their preferences. A lot of my friends have, I would say, more scan tools than I have. And they run a couple laptops and they're partitioned and they would have it no other way. I'm one that we buy a laptop for almost every car line. And the laptops I'm getting are refurbished. I don't think the make matters so much, but they're typically more business class. So you could get any number of makes, brands of laptops, but I kind of lean more towards the business class. I'm looking for Intel processors. Maybe that's a personal preference. It just seems safe. The later generation i5 processors I can get, the better. i7s, of course, wouldn't be so bad, but typically add some cost that may not really be justifiable. And then I'm looking, of course, it's hard to get anything with a solid state drive, thank God, because boot up time is drastically reduced. And really for RAM, I like having 16 gigs. You can probably get away with 8. 16 seems pretty safe. That gets you in it. Windows 10, we could probably start upgrading to 11, but 10 is safe. Still, as far as I know, widely supported. Not so sure about 11. That's not saying 11 won't work, but it may not necessarily be supported. Those are the decisions. Or I guess I should toss in another option, actually. Some PCs, some laptops make hard drive swapping very easy. And therefore you may have a single laptop, if you will, but a stack of hard drives that have different, set up for different car lines, right? So you're going to have your GM hard drive, your Toyota hard drive, your whatever, Volvo hard drive. So I don't want to make these out to be like just these big decisions. Think of these, got a decision to make. Just think of Bob Ross, man. I don't know that there's necessarily a mistake or even a happy accident in this case. It's just a personal preference. I prefer a different laptop, just ready to go. One for each car line. I don't have to worry about driver conflicts. Granted, properly done partitioning, won't have to worry about that either. But for me, for the cost of what the laptops are going for, a couple, $200, $300, $400, it's just the way I've decided to go. And I can't say if my way's better. I certainly have higher stacks of laptops than others because of it, but I don't know. It just seems to simplify stuff for me. And for everybody else that would need to use them, they don't have to figure out how to navigate a partition drive. And I'm not trying to make that sound like it's so difficult, but it's just yet one more thing. Because where we end up this conversation is when you get to using the different software or portals or whatever you want to call it, not only do you have a different user interface for pretty much every scan tool, you have different means of getting there, if that makes sense. Where Chrysler, you have multiple subscriptions to get. GM, you're going to go to a website to log in. We'll have downloaded a program, but you don't get to it through your desktop and just double clicking on an icon. You have to go through the web portal. So each one's different. It just gets to be more and more things for everybody to remember how to do. So, the more simplified you can get, the better. The one less step or two anyone has to do is probably the better. where to find links to all the software. For me, I go through NAS stuff. It essentially ends up being SDRM, but it's free. You got all the car lines, automaker websites, links to programming and, a mobilizer if you need, service information, stuff like that. So for me, that's a really good place to go. Another place would be the OEM One Stop that I don't think requires any signing up or logging in. That will have links, and that takes you to the manufacturer's websites for us, for the independents. And then they will have usually pretty decent instructions on how to get either their factory interface and their software, if possible, if that's available to us, or it will have the aftermarket solution for how to get their software. And mind you, this is where things can get a little bit interesting, is sometimes the scan tool is separate from the programming utility, if you will. And quite a few car lines do it that way, where there's a different place to go, potentially a different subscription for the scan tool portion. But the programming is not linked to the scan tool. You don't do that through the scan tool. It's a separate utility. But the instructions are there. And again, it's different for each car line. And some are more intuitive than the others. But the way to get there, to find those sites, to find those links, I think, for me, primarily is NAS stuff. NASTF.org. Create an account. It's free. And then you can get the links via that. And then again, OEM One Stop. It's just the issue is if you start typing in Google search for this stuff, you can end up in websites that aren't actually the manufacturers. And we'll just say you could end up down a rabbit hole. That's kind of getting into the game. And then if we're going to go with the more generic, if we're going to be using a J tool, J2534, what interface do you get? And I think the standard answer to that is something first time I've heard it was John Riggle. Keith Perkins regularly answers with this. It's my favorite answer. All of them. You need all of them. That may not be reasonable, but it's the safest. If you have all of them, right? And then when one isn't working quite right, you go grab another one. And that isn't working quite right, you go grab the other one. NAPA Autotech training sessions are being conducted day and night in a town near you. This training caters to every level within your organization, be it a mechanical assistant, a mechanical specialist, a technology specialist, or a driver safety calibration specialist. Imagine a one-stop shop training partner in NAPA Autotech that will lead your team to a path to greatness. Autotech's entry-level Build-A-Tech classes convert the untapped potential of your new hires into money-making mechanical specialists. Autotech's higher-level tech update classes introduce specialists to the world of ever-changing technologies, which prevents your shop from getting technologically stagnant. Remember, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. And, turning to the front of the store, the Autotech Service Advisor class is an awesome way to hone your client advocate skill set, ultimately benefiting the customer through an improved vehicle repair experience. But it doesn't stop there. Imagine an electric vehicle class that takes your specialist well past the mundane, yet necessary safety topics. Well, it's here. Autotech's EV Ready training is a week-long curriculum that takes participants through a hands-on experience involving hybrids and electric vehicles. The session kicks off with the use of PPE and proper tooling while touching on required OSHA regulations. Then, the students dive into the lab vehicles to gain knowledge of the common high-voltage components on EV and hybrid vehicles and their function. Attendees will be taken on a path exposing them to different electric vehicle manufacturers to compare component form and location. Additionally, information about Level 1 and Level 2 charging systems will be included, along with a quick look at DC to DC charging. The operation and maintenance of subsystems are explored, including the different modes of Tesla operations, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Commit to taking your business to the next level with NAPA Autotech training. I think DrewTech, the Cardac 3 or Cardac 3 Plus, has the most, we'll just say, verifications, if that makes sense. That it has more validations than most other J2534 tools. Does that mean it always works? No. Does that mean it's the best? Sometimes. If you're only going to get one, that's probably the one. But the thing is many of you probably already have one and you don't know it. And I'm not talking about a Cardac, but a J2534 interface, and it's part of your scan tool. A lot of aftermarket scan tools, you have the handheld tablet, but the actual piece that plugs in, the interface that plugs into the DLC, for many of them, that is a J2534 interface. So if you had a Cardac and then whatever scan tool, I have two. And what you would do is, depending on the make of scan tool we're talking about, you would go to their website, and often they will have PC drivers. And this is where you may want to have a separate laptop, but you can sure try it. You're just trying to avoid driver conflicts. But you would download these drivers so that you could use this interface on that PC. And that's the way you're going to do the programming. It's very rare that we buy an aftermarket scan tool with a tablet of some sort and an interface, and we do all our programming through it. It's just not a very common thing. Usually what happens is you have to take that interface, plug it into a PC, and then using the manufacturer's J2534 utility, if you will, that's how we're going to go about programming. The heavy hitters, I think, Jutech, the Cardac 3 Plus, if you have an Autel scan tool, a MaxAssist, you might already have, your interface might already be a J2534, the Maxi Flash, or depending on which one you have. Other ones, the top-down R-Link, if you have a factory scan tool, like a Ford IDS, and you're using the factory interface, the VCM2, VCM3 will work as a J2534 device. Same with GM's MDI2. If you kind of know what car lines you're going to stick with, and it's kind of a more minimal, Jutech sometimes has offerings where it's essentially a cable that's dedicated to a certain number of car lines, or maybe even car line specific, that would drop the cost. But the reality is if you're going to be using these not only for programming, but also potentially scan tool to step up to higher service capability, what they're charging for J2534 devices probably isn't enough to justify trying to save a buck here and there. And I don't even really mean that condescendingly. I think it's just rather matter of fact. Those prices just aren't cost prohibitive. Another one I'll throw in there, just because it's very interesting, would be like the iScan 3 or the iScan SF. They will mimic interfaces, and therefore it's something to keep in mind. And I don't know if it's true anymore, meaning that they are the only ones that really do that. But remember I had mentioned Volkswagen Audi OE was kind of a way to go versus J2534. Well, one of the reasons was the generic interfaces could not detect the key position. And that's an issue, especially if you're not super familiar with Volkswagen Audi programming. The iScan series, the SF or the 3, would recognize key position, which made that much more useful to us than an interface that didn't. I think some of the newer interfaces now, or with further later updates, are now more capable of doing that. So I would just kind of throw that in there. It's more of both cases, they're full-blown scan tools, but the scan tool itself will mimic an interface and become quite useful. And then really after that, you got your laptop, or you figured out your PC solution, what you're going to do. You've got the links to the factory websites. You're going to have whichever interface, be it factory, OE, J2534. After that, really for in the shop, you're going to have a good battery maintainer. These are responsible for delivering clean power to the car with minimal AC ripple. And then also, depending again on the car line, they have to be able to generate a fair bit of current quickly. And I think the car line that jumps out when you start talking about high amperage would be BMW, because it's not necessarily through the programming event itself, but towards the end, it will start going through some adaptions and teachings or relearns. If you've ever seen one do it, like they have suspension ones where the vehicle's, kind of jumping around, draws a lot of current. Windows are going up and down. And if anybody's just walking in, they think the car is possessed. You got to have a maintainer that's capable of keeping up. In my mind, the heavy hitters are the Top Done T 120,000, or they also have the Top Done Tornado 9,000. But really, that new Top Done T12 120,000, it's really been my favorite maintainer. And then after that, I'm a really big fan of the Clore. We have a couple of the PL 6100s. They've been very good to us. The layout, somewhat similar to the Top Dons. Or I should say, actually, I had the Clore long before I had the Top Don. They kind of have the same look to them. But both of these pump out 100 amps for the Clore, 120 amps for the Top Don. Nice heavy cables. I really like the clamps on the Top Don of all things. I really like them. The Clore, if you get that, you're going to have 20 amp service outlets, or, I don't think it's quite right to use an adapter, but, everybody's going to kind of have to make their decision, because it will have that 20 amp plug-in with the terminals being perpendicular to one another. And then you can hardly go wrong with the Power Maxes. I think they're all over the place, available. Just they're consistent. What can you say? They're simple, they're consistent, they work, they last. I think any of those, more than happy with for battery maintainers. And then after that, good internet. That's the reality. The lower latency you can get, the better. And mind you, your internet going into your building might be actually pretty good. You may have to look at upgrading the modem itself. So you may have to contact your ISP and talk about the best modem they have. And then after that, you may have to get a little techie and dive in a little bit to the IT, where the way I have things set up at the shop, and I don't want to imply that my way is the best way, but we have the modem from the ISP. The only thing that modem feeds is my powered network switch. And I say powered because I used power over Ethernet for my access points. That's all. I have more ports. I think there's like 4 ports out of that modem, but the only thing I have that thing feeding is the network switch. That seems to have garnered me a great performance boost and longevity. We used to burn through modems a few a year. Since going to that, we have yet to do it. Now I've jinxed it. Tomorrow our modem's going to burn down, but yeah, that we've had 0 issues with modems when I'm not having a whole bunch of stuff plugged into it to supply office computers or printers or whatever it may be. It goes right to my network switch. I'm using a 24 port because, like I said, I have a whole bunch of access points, and then I hardwire a lot where I have the Cat5 cables, if you will, or network cables going right to as many PCs as I can, printers as I can, not relying on Wi-Fi. And that greatly improved our internet. I don't know if you've ever listened to like older recordings of Remarkable Results Radio where I was a guest. A lot of times my internet was cutting out and I was always blaming the ISP. And it turned out the internet going in, the internet speeds and everything were great going into the building. It was just everything that was happening after that. And when I upgraded our network, if you will, that kind of cured all those issues. So you don't have to go get a 24 port. A lot of this stuff you can pick up, of course, online, but even at Best Buy, I don't know. I have a rough time buying certain things from Walmart and other retailers like that. If you can do the research and you make sure that what they're selling is the same as what you would get elsewhere, then go for it. But I think any name brand components will work just dandy. You don't necessarily have to get managed switches if you don't want. You're going to have to assess your threat level. I unwittingly went with managed because I didn't understand what it meant when I got it. Now that I have it, I'm kind of happy about it, but there's less BS with unmanaged. Managed, a little more BS, but there is quite a few more layers of security if you feel like you need it. That should get you rolling. And then, of course, the best things you can do is hit classes. There's so many of them. NAPA Autotech training has online, they have in-person. There's other providers, of course, that we know about. And then don't forget social media. Facebook has groups dedicated for programming, scan tools, J2534, getting involved in these, reading, using the search function for crying out loud, make use of the search function. Diag.net is another one. Even IATN, going through the archives, you're going to find plenty of information. And then there's the manufacturers themselves, and I don't mean the car manufacturers, but the tool manufacturers. They have videos available on their sites, on YouTube. There's so much information. If you're not programming, you probably need to be, because it's been around a while now, and it's a regular part of service. It's going to be time to kind of get over the fears and reservations. And if you can, just pick a car line, pick the one you see the most of, or at least, I guess, programming opportunities. But if it's going to probably be related directly to the cars you see the most of. And then buy the factory tool for it. Buy a J-box for the purpose of starting to program those. And that's where you start. Yeah, you're going to have to go for it. You know, I like to joke around that I press buttons and say what's the worst that could happen, and I burn down modules and all that. Okay, I probably exaggerate a little bit. Stuff goes pretty good. You know, now I've told you that you're going to burn down the first one you do, but the reality is like I said, programming has been around a while. Stuff is set up to succeed, but follow the procedure. And I guess to tie this up, the end, service information. Get service information or use the service information. And I'm not talking Google. I'm talking ALLDATA, Mitchell, MotoLogic, the manufacturer OE service information. Follow it. Find documents that talk about what to do for programming. BMW has a really nice document that I use for pretty much all car lines. How to prepare the vehicle for programming. It's brilliant. And it's just stacking the odds. Things are going to be pleasant. They're going to work out. So yeah, I think that's how I'll end it. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head that would put you in a better position to succeed and hopefully remove some of the fears. Go back and listen to episode 83 with Glenn and I. Yeah, keep the questions rolling in. Don't hesitate to email me at mattfonslopodcast@gmail.com. And before I go, I just take a second here to thank our sponsor, NAPA Autotech Training, and also thank the Aftermarket Radio Network. And until next time, take care.
You've been listening to Matt Fonslow, diagnosing the aftermarket A to Z on the Aftermarket Radio Network. Follow Matt on your favorite listening app. He's very interested in what you have to say. Let him know what you'd like him to cover and come on the show. Matt is all for advancing the aftermarket. Find Matt Fonslow on social media and connect or on aftermarketradionetwork.com.